For 3 weeks, Delta Force operatives had been finding enemy combatants eliminated with surgical precision, single shots from impossible distances, yet no sniper teams were deployed in those sectors. The kills were so clean, so perfectly executed, that even seasoned Special Forces operators whispered in disbelief, wondering who was making these phantom strikes. What they never imagined was that their mystery marksman was a 22-year-old European woman who had been serving them meals in the mess hall, someone they walked past every day without a second glance. This is the story of how Heaven Hernandez went from invisible supply clerk to the most feared sniper in the theater of operations. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. The sun cast sharp shadows across forward operating base Phoenix as Heaven Hernandez carried her third load of meal trays toward the Delta Force compound. At 22, she moved with an efficiency that made her nearly invisible to the elite operators who barely acknowledged her presence. Her slight frame and quiet demeanor had earned her the unofficial designation of Ghost Girl among the base personnel, though never said with malice, just the casual dismissal reserved for support staff. Heaven had been assigned to FOB Phoenix for 7 months, managing food distribution and supply coordination for the Special Operations units. Her official role was logistics support specialist, but in practice, she was the person who made sure the warriors had hot meals and clean gear. The Delta Force operators treated her with polite indifference, the kind reserved for efficient but unremarkable service personnel. What none of them knew was that Heaven had grown up in the mountains of Slovenia, where her grandfather had taught her to shoot before she could properly hold a rifle. While other children played video games, she spent afternoons learning to calculate wind speed, humidity, and bullet drop across distances that would challenge professional snipers. Her grandfather, a former Olympic shooting coach, had recognized something extraordinary in her steady hands and patient temperament. The irony wasn't lost on Heaven that she served meals to some of the world's most elite marksmen while possessing skills that exceeded most of theirs. During her off-duty hours, she studied ballistics manuals and memorized the specifications of every weapon system on the base. She had requested transfer to a combat role multiple times, only to be told that her current position was essential and that combat training wasn't available for personnel in her classification. The Delta Force compound buzzed with its usual morning energy as Heaven distributed breakfast to the various teams. Team Alpha was preparing for a reconnaissance mission in the Northern Valley. Team Bravo was conducting equipment checks for a night raid. These operators moved with the confidence of people accustomed to being the most dangerous individuals in any room. Captain Reynolds, Team Alpha's leader, glanced up from his tactical map as Heaven set down his meal tray. She had learned to read maps by studying the ones her grandfather used for hunting expeditions, and could see immediately that Reynolds was planning an approach that would expose his team to crossfire from elevated positions. "Thank you," Reynolds said absently, his attention already back on the mission briefing. Heaven lingered for a moment, wanting to point out the tactical vulnerability she'd spotted, but knowing that offering unsolicited advice would be seen as inappropriate. She was there to serve food, not strategy. She collected empty trays from the previous meal service. Heaven overheard fragments of conversation that painted a picture of increasing frustration among the Delta Force teams. Enemy fighters were proving more elusive than expected, using the mountainous terrain to conduct hit-and-run attacks before disappearing into networks of caves and hidden positions. "These guys know the terrain better than we do," muttered Sergeant Torres from Team Bravo. "Every time we think we have them cornered, they vanish like smoke." Heaven wanted to tell them that she knew those mountains, had studied topographical maps of the region extensively, and could identify hiding spots and escape routes that might not be obvious to operators trained in different environments. But suggesting that a supply clerk might have tactical insights would be career suicide. The morning briefing began as Heaven finished her rounds. She positioned herself near the back of the room, officially there to ensure the coffee remained fresh, but actually absorbing every detail of the operational planning. The intelligence officer reported that enemy activity had increased in sectors 7 and 9, with suspected supply routes running through the eastern ridgelines. Heaven recognized those sectors immediately. The Eastern Ridge system was a complex maze of interconnected valleys and elevated positions that provided excellent cover for anyone who understood the terrain. More importantly, she knew there were natural shooting positions along those ridges that would allow a skilled marksman to dominate the approaches while remaining virtually undetectable. Major Davidson, the operational commander, concluded the briefing with a reminder that all personnel should remain alert for enemy activity. These fighters are well-trained and highly motivated. They know we're here, and they're looking for opportunities to hit us when we're vulnerable. As the teams dispersed to their respective missions, Heaven began planning her own activities. Her official duties would keep her busy until late afternoon, but her evenings were her own. And tonight, like many nights before, she would put her unofficial training to use in ways that no one would ever suspect. The truth was that Heaven had been conducting her own reconnaissance missions for weeks, using her knowledge of the terrain and her exceptional marksmanship skills to gather intelligence and occasionally eliminate threats that the official missions hadn't detected. She told herself it was just practicing her skills, just staying sharp. But deep down, she knew she was doing the job she'd been trained for her entire life, even if no one had officially given her permission. The limitations became apparent during Heaven's first week at FOB Phoenix, when she attempted to volunteer for combat training exercises. Staff Sergeant Williams had looked at her with barely concealed amusement, his eyes taking in her 5 feet 4 inches frame and 115-pound build with the kind of assessment reserved for someone fundamentally misplaced. "Hernandez, your support staff," Williams had explained with the patience of someone addressing a confused child. "Combat training is for combat personnel. Your job is logistics, and you're good at it. Stick to what you know." What Williams didn't know was that Heaven had been sticking to what she knew her entire life, and what she knew was precision shooting at distances that would challenge Olympic athletes. Her grandfather's training had been rigorous and uncompromising. By age 16, she could consistently hit targets at 800 meters with iron sights. By 18, she was calculating complex ballistic equations in her head while adjusting for wind, temperature, and atmospheric pressure. The rejection pattern continued throughout her assignment. When she requested access to the base firing range during off-duty hours, she was told that ammunition was reserved for combat personnel. When she asked about cross-training opportunities, she was informed that her security clearance didn't permit access to advanced weapons systems. When she suggested improvements to supply route security based on her terrain analysis, she was thanked politely and ignored completely. Heaven learned to recognize the look that crossed people's faces when she expressed interest in anything beyond her assigned duties. It was a mixture of confusion and mild concern, as if she were displaying symptoms of some form of delusion. The assumption was always the same: support staff didn't possess combat capabilities, and any claims to the contrary were either naive ambition or dangerous overconfidence. The breaking point came during a base security drill when Heaven noticed that the simulated enemy approach route passed directly through a section of terrain that she knew intimately. The designated defenders had positioned themselves to cover the obvious approaches but had missed a concealed ravine that would allow attackers to advance undetected to within 50 meters of the perimeter. Heaven approached Lieutenant Foster, who was coordinating the defensive positions, and attempted to explain the vulnerability. "Sir, there's a concealed approach through the eastern ravine that isn't covered by the current defensive positions." Foster glanced at her name tape and then back at her face with the expression of someone trying to understand why the mess hall staff was offering tactical advice. "Hernandez, I appreciate your concern, but we have trained personnel handling security planning. Your focus should be on ensuring the exercise participants have adequate refreshments." "Sir, I've studied the terrain extensively, and that ravine provides concealment for an approach that could compromise the entire defensive perimeter," Heaven persisted, knowing she was crossing professional boundaries but unable to watch a critical vulnerability go unaddressed. "Hernandez," Foster's voice carried a warning edge, "your job is logistics support. Security planning is handled by qualified personnel who have been trained for this responsibility. I need you to stay in your lane. Stay in your lane." The phrase followed Heaven like a shadow throughout her deployment. It was the polite military way of saying that ambition beyond one's assigned role was inappropriate, potentially dangerous, and definitely unwelcome. The assumption was that she lacked the training, the temperament, and the physical capability for anything beyond support duties. What made the limitations particularly frustrating was that Heaven could see problems that others missed. Her grandfather had taught her to read terrain like a language, to identify strategic positions and tactical vulnerabilities with the kind of intuitive understanding that came from years of practical experience. But every time she attempted to share these insights, she was reminded that observation and analysis were not part of her job description. The social dynamics of the base reinforced these limitations in subtle but persistent ways. During off-duty hours, combat personnel socialized primarily with other combat personnel. Support staff formed their own informal networks, discussing matters related to supplies, schedules, and administrative concerns. Heaven found herself caught between worlds, possessing knowledge and skills that aligned with the combat personnel, but holding a position that relegated her to support functions. The other support staff members seemed content with their roles, taking pride in the essential services they provided to the mission. Heaven respected their dedication, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was capable of contributing more directly to operational success. Her evenings were spent studying tactical manuals, memorizing weapon specifications, and analyzing terrain features that might prove relevant to future missions. Nobody questioned why a logistics specialist would possess extensive knowledge of ballistic coefficients, or why she could identify sniper positions from studying satellite imagery. Her colleagues assumed it was academic interest, the kind of hobby that some people developed when deployed to combat zones. They had no way of knowing that her hobby represented decades of intensive training under one of Europe's most accomplished shooting instructors. The most painful limitation was the knowledge that she could make a difference if given the opportunity. Heaven watched Delta Force teams struggle with challenges that her training had prepared her to address. She saw tactical situations where her unique combination of terrain knowledge and marksmanship skills could provide decisive advantages. But the military's rigid structure meant that crossing role boundaries, even to save lives, was considered inappropriate and potentially dangerous. As weeks passed, Heaven began to understand that proving her capabilities would require more than requests and suggestions. The system wasn't designed to recognize potential in unexpected places, and waiting for permission might mean waiting forever. If she wanted to demonstrate her value, she would need to create opportunities rather than request them. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. Taking initiative beyond her assigned role could end her military career, but continuing to serve meals while possessing the skills to eliminate threats felt like a different kind of failure. Heaven began to consider what it might mean to step outside the boundaries that others had drawn around her capabilities. The decision, when it came, wouldn't be about career advancement or personal recognition. It would be about watching fellow service members face dangers that she was uniquely qualified to address. And choosing between following orders and following her conscience, that we've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. The pattern of dismissal became a weekly ritual that Heaven could predict with clockwork precision. Every Monday morning, she would review the mission assignments posted on the operations board, identifying opportunities where her skills could contribute to team success. Every Monday afternoon, she would approach the appropriate personnel with carefully prepared suggestions, only to receive the same polite but firm rejections. During the third week of September, Team Charlie was planning a reconnaissance mission in the northern ridgeline, an area Heaven knew intimately from her grandfather's hunting expeditions in similar terrain. She had spent hours studying the topographical maps, identifying observation points that would provide comprehensive coverage of the valley approaches while maintaining concealment from enemy forces. Sergeant Rodriguez. Heaven approached the team leader during the pre-mission briefing. I've analyzed the terrain for your operational area, and I believe there are several observation points that might not be apparent from the standard reconnaissance protocols. Rodriguez looked up from his equipment checklist with the expression of someone interrupted by an unexpected distraction. Hernandez, we appreciate your interest, but reconnaissance planning is handled by trained personnel. Your focus should be on ensuring our equipment manifests are accurate. Sir, I understand the protocols, but I have extensive experience with mountain terrain analysis. There are concealed positions that could provide strategic advantages, Heaven persisted. Knowing she was pushing boundaries but unable to watch a potentially compromised mission proceed without offering her insights. Hernandez. Rodriguez's tone carried the patience of someone explaining obvious facts. Mountain reconnaissance requires specialized training, physical conditioning, and tactical experience that takes years to develop. Your background is logistics support. These are fundamentally different skill sets. The conversation ended as they always did, with Heaven nodding acknowledgement while internally calculating the tactical errors that would likely compromise the mission's effectiveness. Team Charlie departed the following morning using an approach route that exposed them to observation from 3 different elevated positions that Heaven had identified as potential enemy strongholds. 2 days later, Team Charlie returned with incomplete intelligence after detecting enemy surveillance that forced them to abort their primary objectives. Heaven learned about the mission's limitations during the debrief session she attended to document equipment returns. Watching as Rodriguez explained how unexpected enemy positions had compromised their observation capabilities, the October incidents followed similar patterns. Team Bravo requested intelligence support for a night raid targeting suspected weapons caches in the Eastern Valley system. Heaven recognized the target area immediately and spent her off-duty hours analyzing satellite imagery to identify potential cache locations based on terrain features and access routes. Her analysis indicated that the suspected sites were likely decoys, while the actual storage facilities would be located in a series of natural caves accessible only through concealed approaches. When she attempted to share this analysis with Lieutenant Thompson, the response was predictably dismissive. Hernandez, intelligence analysis is conducted by qualified specialists using classified resources and established methodologies. Your observations, while well-intentioned, aren't based on professional intelligence training. Sir, my analysis is based on terrain features and tactical principles that apply regardless of the specific intelligence classification, Heaven replied. Her frustration carefully controlled but increasingly difficult to conceal that Thompson's expression shifted from patient dismissal to mild concern. Hernandez, I need to be clear about something. Your enthusiasm for operational matters is noted, but it's also becoming a pattern that raises questions about your focus on assigned duties. Your job is logistics. Support. Period. The night raid proceeded, according to the original intelligence assessment, and returned with minimal actionable intelligence after discovering that the suspected cache sites contained only decoy materials. The actual weapons storage remained undetected and operational, a result that Heaven had predicted but been unable to communicate effectively. November brought the most painful rejection when Team Alpha faced a hostage rescue scenario that required precise shooting from extreme distances. The tactical situation demanded marksmanship capabilities that exceeded standard military training, with shots that would need to be executed across distances of 800–1000 meters in variable wind conditions. Heaven knew she could make those shots. Her grandfather had trained her specifically for extreme distance precision shooting, and she had been practicing those exact scenarios since childhood. The hostage location was in terrain she understood intimately, and the environmental conditions were well within her experience range. Captain Reynolds, she approached the team leader during mission planning. I have extensive experience with extreme distance precision shooting. If additional marksmanship support would be valuable for the hostage rescue operation, I'm qualified to provide that capability. Reynolds stared at her for several seconds as if she had announced an intention to pilot a fighter jet. Hernandez, what you're describing requires years of specialized training and combat experience. Precision shooting at tactical distances isn't something you learn as a hobby. Sir, I understand the requirements, and I have the necessary training and experience, Heaven replied, her voice steady despite the familiar sting of automatic dismissal. From where exactly? Reynolds asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to genuinely curious about what he clearly viewed as a delusional claim. Private instruction from qualified personnel over extended periods, Heaven answered, knowing that explaining her grandfather's credentials would only make her story seem less credible. Reynolds exchanged glances with his team members, and Heaven could see the unspoken communication that passed between them. Another support staff member with unrealistic assessments of their own capabilities, probably influenced by too many action movies and insufficient understanding of actual tactical requirements. Hernandez, I appreciate your willingness to help, but what you're describing isn't realistic. Stick to what you know and let us handle the tactical aspects. The hostage rescue proceeded with the available personnel and achieved partial success. Though 2 hostages died when the designated marksman couldn't establish clear shooting lanes from the positions accessible to the team. Heaven watched the mission debrief knowing that she could have provided the precision shooting capability that might have prevented those casualties. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. Heaven's transformation began in the darkness before dawn, during the hours when FOB Phoenix existed in the quiet transition between night watch and morning operations. While others slept, she conducted her real training. The preparation that would eventually prove more valuable than any official military education. Her grandfather's teachings had provided the foundation, but adapting those skills to combat conditions required extensive additional development. Every piece of equipment on the base became a potential training tool, every mission briefing an opportunity to study tactical applications of marksmanship, skills that others assumed she didn't possess. The base armory became her classroom during inventory, procedures that she volunteered to conduct alone. While officially counting weapons and ammunition, Heaven memorized the specifications of every rifle, every scope, every piece of precision shooting equipment in the facility. She studied ballistic charts until she could calculate bullet drop and wind drift in her head, factoring in variables like temperature, humidity, and altitude with the speed of mental arithmetic. Her quarters became a tactical laboratory where she analyzed satellite imagery and topographical maps during off-duty hours. The laptop computer assigned for logistics coordination was repurposed for studying terrain features, identifying potential shooting positions, and calculating range estimates to probable target areas. She created detailed notebooks documenting wind patterns, visibility conditions, and seasonal variations that might affect long-range shooting throughout the operational area. The most challenging aspect of her preparation was acquiring practical shooting experience without access to official training resources. Heaven solved this problem through creative adaptation of maintenance duties that took her outside the base perimeter. Equipment recovery missions and supply convoy security provided opportunities to practice range estimation and target identification in realistic conditions. During one particularly valuable training session, Heaven volunteered to accompany a convoy security team traveling to a forward observation post 20 kilometers from the main base. While the security personnel focused on potential threats along the road, Heaven used the opportunity to practice calculating ranges to various terrain features, mentally mapping shooting positions that would provide coverage of the convoy route. Sergeant Davis, the convoy leader, noticed her attention to the surrounding terrain. First time outside the wire, Hernandez? No, sir, but I'm always interested in understanding the tactical environment, Heaven replied, her binoculars trained on a ridgeline approximately 600 meters distant. Good attitude. Most support staff don't pay attention to anything beyond their immediate responsibilities, Davis commented approvingly, unaware that Heaven was conducting advanced reconnaissance training while he spoke. What Davis couldn't see was Heaven's mental calculation of wind speed based on vegetation movement, her assessment of natural concealment positions along the ridgeline, and her identification of 3 separate locations that would provide optimal shooting positions for covering the convoy route. Information that she filed away for future reference. The most significant breakthrough in her preparation came when she discovered that the base's long-range communication equipment required periodic calibration using laser range-finding devices. Heaven volunteered to assist with these procedures, gaining access to precision measurement tools that allowed her to verify her visual range estimation skills against actual distances. The communication technician, Corporal Zhang, was grateful for the additional help. This calibration process is tedious work, but it's critical for maintaining signal quality. Most people find it boring. I find precision measurement interesting, Heaven replied truthfully, using the range-finding equipment to verify distances to landmarks throughout the valley system. Accuracy matters regardless of the application. During these calibration sessions, Heaven systematically mapped the distances to every significant terrain feature within a 10-kilometer radius of the base. She created mental databases of range information that would prove invaluable for actual shooting scenarios, all while appearing to conduct routine technical maintenance. Her physical conditioning program was equally methodical. While others used the base fitness facilities for standard military PT, Heaven focused on specific skills required for precision shooting. Her cardio training emphasized breath control and heart rate management under stress. Her strength training concentrated on core stability and grip strength that would affect shooting accuracy. The mental preparation was perhaps the most intensive aspect of her development. Heaven studied combat psychology, learning to recognize and manage the emotional factors that affected performance under extreme stress. She practiced visualization techniques, mentally rehearsing shooting scenarios until her responses became automatic. Every night before sleep, she would review the day's observations, updating her mental maps of potential shooting positions and target areas. She analyzed the patrol routes used by friendly forces, identifying gaps in coverage that might create tactical vulnerabilities. She studied the movement patterns of enemy forces as reported in intelligence briefings, looking for predictable behaviors that might create shooting opportunities. Her notebook collection grew to include detailed weather logs, recording wind patterns, visibility conditions, and atmospheric factors that might influence long-range shooting. She correlated this information with mission reports, learning to predict environmental conditions that would affect tactical operations. The preparation extended to psychological readiness for the possibility that she might actually use these skills in combat situations. Heaven spent considerable time thinking about the moral and ethical aspects of precision shooting, preparing herself mentally for the reality that her training might someday involve taking human lives in defense of her fellow service members. None of her colleagues suspected the extent of her preparation. To them, she remained the efficient but unremarkable logistics specialist who ensured their equipment was properly maintained and their meals were served on time. Her transformation was invisible, conducted in the spaces between official duties and during the hours when others were off-duty. By December, Heaven possessed a combination of skills that few professional snipers could match. Her theoretical knowledge was comprehensive, her practical experience was extensive, and her equipment familiarity was complete. What she lacked was opportunity. The chance to demonstrate that months of secret preparation had created capabilities that could contribute meaningfully to mission success. That opportunity was approaching faster than anyone realized. The first signs of suspicion emerged during a routine equipment audit in early December when Master Sergeant Collins discovered discrepancies in the range-finding equipment usage logs. The devices showed significantly more operating hours than could be accounted for by scheduled calibration procedures, suggesting that someone had been accessing the equipment for unauthorized purposes. Hernandez, Collins called her into his office after completing the audit. "You've been assisting with communication equipment calibration for the past 2 months. Have you noticed anything unusual about the range-finding devices?" Heaven felt her pulse quicken but maintained her composure. "No, sir, just the standard calibration procedures. The equipment has been functioning normally during all the sessions I've participated in." Collins studied the usage logs with the methodical attention of someone trained to identify irregularities in administrative procedures. "These devices have logged 37 additional hours of operation beyond scheduled maintenance. That's significant unauthorized usage. Perhaps other personnel have been conducting additional calibrations without updating the logs," Heaven suggested, knowing that Collins would investigate that possibility and find no evidence of such activity. "Perhaps," Collins replied, though his tone suggested skepticism. "I'll be monitoring equipment usage more closely going forward. Make sure you document any activities that involve technical equipment, even routine assistance." The conversation ended without direct accusations, but Heaven recognized that her training activities had created an administrative trail that could draw unwanted attention. She would need to be more careful about using base resources for her preparation activities. 2 weeks later, the suspicion intensified when Lieutenant Foster noticed that Heaven's off-duty activities seemed unusually focused on operational matters. During a social gathering in the base recreation facility, Foster observed Heaven studying tactical manuals while others watched movies or played card games. "Heavy reading for relaxation time," Foster commented. noting the advanced ballistics textbook in Heaven's hands. I find technical subjects interesting, Heaven replied, closing the book without displaying the detailed notes she had been making in the margins. That Foster's expression suggested mild concern rather than casual curiosity. That's pretty specialized material for someone in logistics support. Ballistics calculations aren't exactly recreational reading. I have a background in physics. The mathematical principles are applicable to various fields, Heaven answered, her explanation technically accurate but deliberately vague about the specific applications she was studying. Physics background, Foster repeated thoughtfully. That wasn't mentioned in your personnel file when you were assigned to this unit. Heaven felt a chill of recognition that Foster was conducting what amounted to an informal investigation into her qualifications and activities. Educational background isn't always relevant to assigned duties. The conversation moved to other topics, but Heaven noticed that Foster continued to observe her activities with increased attention throughout the evening. She began to realize that her enthusiasm for operational matters was being interpreted as potential evidence of inappropriate ambitions or possible security concerns. The situation escalated during a mission briefing when Heaven made a comment that revealed more tactical knowledge than her position should theoretically provide. Team Bravo was planning a reconnaissance mission that would require movement through a section of terrain that Heaven knew contained several concealed observation points. Without thinking carefully about the implications, she mentioned that the planned route would expose the team to observation from elevated positions that weren't visible on standard topographical maps but could be identified through careful terrain analysis. Captain Wade, who was conducting the briefing, stopped mid-sentence and stared at Heaven with the expression of someone who had just heard an unexpected and concerning statement. Hernandez, how exactly would you know about concealed observation points in that sector? Wade asked, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone who suspected they were dealing with a security issue. Heaven realized that she had made a significant error in revealing knowledge that couldn't be explained through her official duties or training. I've studied the topographical characteristics of the operational area during my logistics coordination responsibilities. Logistics coordination doesn't involve identifying concealed tactical positions, Wade replied, his tone growing more serious. That kind of analysis requires specialized training and access to classified intelligence resources. The briefing room fell silent as other personnel turned their attention to what was clearly becoming a security-related inquiry. Heaven understood that her comment had crossed a line that would be difficult to explain away without revealing the extent of her unauthorized preparation activities. Sir, I apologize if my comment was inappropriate. I was simply trying to contribute to mission safety based on general terrain observations, Heaven said, attempting to defuse the situation without providing more information that might deepen the suspicion. Wade exchanged glances with other officers present, and Heaven could see the unspoken communication that indicated her activities would be subject to additional scrutiny. Hernandez, I think we need to have a more detailed conversation about your understanding of operational procedures and information security protocols. The formal inquiry began the following day when Heaven was summoned to meet with Major Davidson and the base security officer. Her personnel file was spread across the conference table like evidence in a criminal investigation, and both officers wore expressions that suggested serious concerns about her activities and motivations. Specialist Hernandez, Major Davidson began. There have been reports that you've been studying materials and expressing knowledge that extends significantly beyond your assigned duties and security clearance. We need to understand the source and purpose of these activities. Heaven recognized that she had reached a critical decision point. She could continue to provide vague explanations that might temporarily satisfy the inquiry, but would certainly result in restrictions on her activities and increased surveillance. Or she could acknowledge the truth about her preparation while accepting the consequences of having exceeded the boundaries of her assigned role. The choice would determine not only her immediate future, but also whether her months of careful preparation would ever have the opportunity to serve their intended purpose. The security interview took place in a sterile conference room that felt more like an interrogation chamber than a casual administrative meeting. Major Davidson sat across from Heaven with her complete personnel file spread before him, while Security Officer Lieutenant Porter positioned himself to observe her responses from a different angle, a standard technique for detecting deception or evasion. Specialist Hernandez, Davidson began, his voice carrying the formal tone reserved for serious disciplinary matters. Over the past several weeks, we've documented a pattern of activities that raises significant questions about your understanding of appropriate boundaries for personnel in your position. Heaven maintained eye contact while internally calculating the potential consequences of various responses. Her months of preparation had included consideration of this exact scenario, and she had decided that partial honesty would be less dangerous than continued deception if directly confronted. Sir, I take my responsibilities seriously and have worked to develop additional skills that might contribute to mission effectiveness, she replied, choosing words that acknowledged her activities without admitting to specific security violations. Porter leaned forward, consulting his notes with the systematic attention of someone building a case. Additional skills such as advanced ballistics calculations, terrain analysis, and tactical reconnaissance, those aren't typically associated with logistics support duties. No, sir, but they represent areas of personal interest that I believed might have professional applications, Heaven answered, maintaining the position that her activities were motivated by dedication rather than inappropriate ambition. Davidson's expression suggested skepticism about explanations that seemed designed to minimize the significance of what they had discovered. Personal interest in tactical operations raises questions about your understanding of role boundaries and security protocols. Where exactly did you acquire knowledge of ballistics calculations and reconnaissance techniques? This was the question Heaven had been dreading, the one that would require her to either reveal her grandfather's background and her extensive private training, or attempt to maintain implausible claims about self-directed learning that couldn't account for the depth of her knowledge. Sir, I received private instruction in marksmanship and related subjects prior to my military service, she said, deciding that acknowledging her training was less risky than continuing to evade questions that would eventually expose the truth anyway. Private instruction from whom? Porter asked immediately, his pen ready to document whatever response she provided. From qualified civilian instructors with extensive experience in precision shooting disciplines, Heaven replied, keeping her answer technically accurate while avoiding specific details that might complicate the situation. Further, Davidson and Porter exchanged glances that clearly indicated skepticism about explanations that seemed deliberately vague. Hernandez, we're going to need more specific information about your background and training. Security protocols require complete disclosure of all relevant qualifications and experience. Heaven realized that she had reached the point where continued evasion would be interpreted as evidence of security concerns or possible foreign connections that could end her military career immediately. Her grandfather's Olympic coaching background and her extensive training were matters of public record that could be verified, but revealing them would also confirm that she possessed capabilities far beyond her assigned role. Sir, I received marksmanship training from my grandfather, who was a former Olympic shooting coach in Slovenia. The instruction included precision shooting, ballistics calculations, and terrain analysis for competitive and hunting applications, she said, providing the truth while emphasizing the civilian rather than military applications of her training. The information clearly surprised both officers, who had been expecting either admissions of inappropriate ambition or evidence of security violations rather than disclosure of legitimate but unreported qualifications. Olympic-level shooting instruction, Davidson repeated slowly, his tone shifting from interrogation to assessment. Why wasn't this background included in your personnel file or mentioned during your assignment to this unit? Sir, I didn't believe that civilian shooting experience was relevant to logistics support duties, Heaven replied, which was technically true even though it avoided mentioning her desire to transition to combat roles. Porter made extensive notes while asking follow-up questions about her grandfather's credentials, the specific training she had received, and the extent of her current capabilities. Heaven answered honestly, while being careful not to volunteer information about her recent unauthorized training activities using base resources. Hernandez, Davidson said after reviewing his notes, What you're describing represents significant qualifications that could be relevant to various military applications. The question is why you chose to conceal these capabilities rather than pursue appropriate channels for utilizing them. This was the confrontation Heaven had been anticipating. The moment when she would need to address the gap between her qualifications and her assigned role without criticizing the decisions that had led to her current position. Sir, I attempted to request transfer to positions that might utilize these skills, but was informed that my current role was essential and that cross-training opportunities weren't available for personnel in my classification, she answered, keeping her tone neutral despite the frustration the memories evoked. And so you decided to continue developing these skills independently while conducting unauthorized activities using base resources, Porter stated. His comment clearly intended to elicit an admission of the equipment usage and training activities they had discovered. Heaven understood that denying the obvious would only damage her credibility further. Sir, I used available opportunities to maintain and develop skills that I believed might eventually contribute to mission effectiveness. Davidson closed her personnel file and studied her with the expression of someone reassessing fundamental assumptions. Hernandez, what you've described represents a significant disconnect between your actual qualifications and your assigned duties. This situation requires resolution at levels above my authority. Sir, I understand that my activities may have been inappropriate, and I accept responsibility for any violations of protocol, Heaven said, preparing herself for whatever disciplinary action would result from the investigation. This isn't about discipline, Hernandez. This is about resource allocation and personnel utilization, Davidson replied, his tone suggesting that the conversation had shifted from security investigation to strategic assessment. Report to Colonel Patterson's office tomorrow at 0800 hours. He'll determine how to address the gap between your capabilities and your current assignment. As Heaven left the conference room, she realized that her months of careful preparation and secret training had been exposed. But the consequences might be different than she had expected. Instead of facing punishment for exceeding her role boundaries, she might finally have the opportunity to demonstrate that her capabilities could contribute meaningfully to mission success. The confrontation she had dreaded might become the breakthrough she had been working toward. At 0347 hours on a cold January morning, the emergency alarm shattered the pre-dawn quiet of FOB Phoenix with an urgency that sent personnel scrambling from their quarters. Heaven was already awake, having spent another sleepless night anticipating her meeting with Colonel Patterson, when the base communications system crackled to life with reports that would change everything. All personnel, this is command. We have multiple friendlies down in Sector 9. Delta Force reconnaissance team under heavy fire from unknown positions. Immediate assistance required. Heaven threw on her gear and rushed toward the command center, where chaos was already building as officers coordinated emergency response efforts. The main tactical display showed a red zone marking Team Alpha's last known position, surrounded by terrain that Heaven recognized as some of the most challenging in the operational area. Captain Reynolds' voice came through the radio with static interference that couldn't mask the desperation in his tone. Command, we have 3 wounded and are pinned down by sniper fire from multiple elevated positions. Cannot identify shooter locations. Request immediate support. Major Davidson stood at the center of the coordinated response, his face grim as he assessed options that seemed increasingly limited. Air support is grounded due to weather conditions. Ground reinforcement will take 2 hours minimum to reach their position through that terrain. Heaven studied the tactical display with growing recognition that this was exactly the scenario her grandfather had trained her for. The enemy snipers had positioned themselves in natural hiding spots that she had identified during her months of terrain analysis. Locations that provided perfect concealment while commanding overlapping fields of fire. Sir, Sergeant Torres reported from the communications station. Team Alpha reports that enemy fire is coming from at least 3 positions. Range estimated between 600 and 800 meters. They can't move without exposing themselves to additional fire. The range estimates confirmed what Heaven already knew. The enemy had established a coordinated sniper ambush using positions that she had mapped extensively during her unauthorized reconnaissance activities. More importantly, She knew there was a concealed approach route that could allow someone to reach counter-sniper positions without being detected. Counter-sniper teams are being prepared for deployment, Davidson announced, but they'll need 4 hours minimum to reach effective positions through the available approach routes. For hours, Heaven knew that Team Alpha couldn't survive 4 hours of sustained sniper fire while trapped in their current position. The wounded personnel needed immediate medical attention, and the team's ammunition wouldn't last through an extended engagement with multiple enemy snipers. She stepped forward, knowing that what she was about to propose would either save lives or end her military career. "Sir, I know those positions. I can reach counter-sniper locations through concealed routes that would allow engagement within 90 minutes. The command center fell silent except for the static of radio communications. Every officer turned toward Heaven with expressions ranging from disbelief to concern about her mental state. The idea that a logistics specialist could accomplish what trained counter-sniper teams would need 4 hours to attempt seemed beyond consideration. "Hernandez," Davidson's voice carried warning edges. "This is not the time for inappropriate suggestions. We need professional solutions to a professional problem. Sir, I have the training and local knowledge necessary to execute this mission," Heaven replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. "Team Alpha doesn't have 4 hours." Lieutenant Porter, who had participated in her security interview, spoke up with sharp concern. "Major, Specialist Hernandez has been under investigation for activities that suggest poor judgment regarding role boundaries. Her suggestion confirms those concerns." Heaven felt familiar frustration building, but this time it was different. This time, there were lives at stake, and the institutional barriers that had always limited her opportunities were literally preventing her from saving her fellow soldiers. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through the command center noise, "I was trained by an Olympic shooting coach. I have mapped every approach route in Sector 9. I know exactly where those snipers are positioned, and I know how to reach them." The radio crackled with another transmission from Team Alpha. "Command, we've lost visual on Peterson. Enemy fire is increasing. We need support now." Davidson stared at Heaven with the expression of someone forced to consider impossible options under impossible circumstances. The conventional response would take too long, and unconventional responses required capabilities that shouldn't exist in logistics personnel. "Hernandez, what you're describing is a suicide mission even for trained personnel," he said, his tone suggesting he was actually considering her proposal despite its apparent impossibility. "Sir, it's not suicide if you know the terrain and have the skills to execute the mission effectively," Heaven replied. "I have both." Colonel Patterson chose that moment to enter the command center, having been summoned by reports of the crisis situation. He took in the tactical display, the radio communications, and the tense atmosphere with the rapid assessment of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. "What's our response status?" Patterson asked, his eyes moving between the tactical situation and the personnel present. "Sir, conventional counter-sniper response will require 4 hours due to terrain and approach limitations," Davidson reported. "Specialist Hernandez has proposed an alternative approach based on claimed qualifications that weren't previously documented." Patterson's gaze settled on Heaven with sharp attention. "You're the logistics specialist with undisclosed shooting background." "Yes, sir. And I know I can reach those sniper positions and neutralize the threat to Team Alpha," Heaven replied, meeting his stare with the confidence that her grandfather had taught her was essential for earning respect from authority figures. The radio transmission that followed made the decision for everyone. "Command, this is Team Alpha. We have 2 more wounded. If we don't get support in the next hour, we're not making it out." Patterson studied the tactical display for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then he looked back at Heaven with the expression of someone about to make a decision that would either save lives or create a disaster that would end multiple careers. "Hernandez, if you're wrong about your capabilities, people die. Are you absolutely certain you can execute this mission?" Heaven thought about her grandfather's training, her months of preparation, and the alternative of watching Team Alpha die while she possessed the skills to save them. "Yes, sir, I'm certain." Colonel Patterson's next words would determine whether Heaven's months of secret preparation had meaning or whether she would watch her fellow soldiers die while possessing the capabilities to save them. The command center held its collective breath as he weighed options that ranged from conventional failure to unprecedented risk. Major Davidson, what's your assessment of our conventional response timeline? Patterson asked, his voice carrying the calculated calm of someone accustomed to making decisions under extreme pressure. Sir, our fastest counter-sniper deployment would require 3.5 hours minimum to reach effective positions. Weather conditions prevent air support, and ground approach routes through that terrain are limited and predictable, Davidson replied. His tone acknowledging the inadequacy of available options. Patterson turned his attention back to Heaven, studying her with the intensity of someone evaluating equipment under battlefield conditions. Specialist Hernandez, explain exactly what you're proposing and why you believe it's feasible. Heaven had rehearsed this moment mentally for months, knowing that if the opportunity ever arose, she would have only one chance to present her case convincingly. Sir, there's a concealed approach route through the Eastern Ridge system that allows access to elevated positions overlooking the enemy sniper locations. I've mapped these routes extensively and identified optimal shooting positions that would provide clear engagement opportunities. How do you know about concealed approach routes in enemy territory? Lieutenant Porter interjected, his security concerns clearly taking precedence over tactical considerations. Because I've studied every topographical feature in this operational area and conducted personal reconnaissance to verify route feasibility. Heaven answered, knowing that admitting to unauthorized activities outside the base perimeter would normally end her career immediately. Patterson held up a hand to prevent further interruption. Continue with your tactical assessment, Hernandez. Heaven moved to the tactical display, pointing to terrain features that she knew better than anyone else in the room. The enemy snipers are positioned here, here, and here, using natural concealment that provides overlapping fields of fire while remaining invisible to conventional observation. The approach I'm proposing would allow me to reach this position, approximately 750 meters from the primary threat, with clear shooting lanes to all three locations. 750 meters in variable wind conditions with lives depending on first shot accuracy, Patterson observed. That's beyond the capabilities of most professional snipers. Sir, I've been making those shots consistently since I was 16 years old, Heaven replied, her voice carrying quiet confidence rather than boastful claims. The radio crackled with another desperate transmission from Team Alpha. Command, Williams is hit bad. We need immediate extraction or medical support. Enemy fire is intensifying. Patterson's expression shifted as the tactical situation deteriorated beyond the point where conventional solutions remain viable. Hernandez, if I authorize this mission, you'll be operating alone in enemy territory with no backup and no extraction support if things go wrong. You understand that? Yes, sir. I also understand that Team Alpha dies if someone doesn't take action that conventional responses can't provide, Heaven answered, her grandfather's lessons about accepting responsibility echoing in her mind. Major Davidson stepped forward with obvious concern about the direction of the conversation. Sir, what Specialist Hernandez is proposing violates multiple protocols regarding personnel utilization and mission authorization, even if she possesses the claimed capabilities. Authorizing this mission creates precedents that could compromise future operations. Major, precedents become irrelevant when soldiers are dying and conventional options have failed, Patterson replied sharply. The question is whether we have any realistic alternative to watching Team Alpha get eliminated. While we follow protocols, Heaven could see the internal conflict playing out across the faces of everyone present. Military doctrine emphasized careful planning, appropriate resource allocation, and adherence to established procedures. What she was proposing violated all of those principles while offering the only realistic chance of saving lives that were being lost while they debated protocols. Sir, she said quietly, I know I can make this work. I've been preparing for exactly this scenario for months. Give me the chance to prove that my preparation wasn't just academic exercise. Patterson studied her for several seconds that felt like an eternity. Hernandez, you're asking me to authorize a mission that could save Team Alpha or could result in your death and the loss of our only unconventional response option. You're certain about your capabilities? Sir, I'm more certain about this than anything else I've ever attempted, Heaven replied, thinking about every hour of training, every range session with her grandfather, every night spent studying terrain maps and ballistic calculations. The command center radio transmitted another update that removed any remaining time for deliberation. Command, this is Team Alpha Actual. We have 4 wounded now, including serious casualties. Enemy fire is systematic and coordinated. We're running low on ammunition and medical supplies. Request immediate support or authorization for emergency extraction procedures. Emergency extraction procedures meant leaving wounded personnel behind, an option that no one wanted to consider, but that might become necessary if the situation continued deteriorating. Patterson made his decision with the finality of someone who had calculated all available options and found only one that offered realistic hope of success. Hernandez, you have authorization for immediate deployment. Use whatever equipment and support you require. The words hit Heaven like an electric shock. After months of being dismissed and overlooked, she had been given not just permission but official authorization to attempt what everyone else considered impossible. Sir, I'll need access to precision shooting equipment and authorization to operate independently outside normal command structure, she said, her mind already shifting into tactical planning mode. Granted. Take whatever you need and report your requirements to Master Sergeant Collins for immediate processing, Patterson replied. And Hernandez, bring our people home. As Heaven moved toward the equipment area to begin her mission preparation, she heard Patterson addressing the command center personnel with words that acknowledged the unprecedented nature of what was happening. This mission represents calculated risk based on exceptional circumstances. If Specialist Hernandez succeeds, we save lives that conventional responses couldn't protect. If she fails, we've lost nothing that we wouldn't have lost anyway. Heaven began selecting equipment with hands that remained steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. The impossible choice had been made, and now she had to prove that months of secret preparation could translate into mission success when lives depended on her capabilities. Heaven moved through the equipment selection process with methodical precision, her hands steady despite the awareness that she was about to attempt something that would either vindicate months of preparation or end multiple lives, including her own. The base armory had become her final classroom, where theoretical knowledge would translate into tools for saving Team Alpha. Master Sergeant Collins watched with professional curiosity as Heaven bypassed standard infantry weapons in favor of the precision rifle systems typically reserved for specialized personnel. Her selections revealed knowledge of equipment specifications that shouldn't exist in logistics support staff. The M110 semi-automatic system. Collins questioned as Heaven examined the rifle's scope mounting and barrel configuration. Insufficient accuracy for the range and conditions, Heaven replied. Her assessment delivered with quiet confidence. I need the M24 bolt-action system with the Leupold variable scope and match-grade ammunition. Collins's expression shifted from curiosity to surprise. The M24 was the weapon system preferred by professional snipers for extreme-range precision shooting, and requesting specific scope configurations suggested familiarity that extended far beyond basic marksmanship training. Hernandez, that weapon system requires specialized training and certification that isn't documented in your personnel file, Collins observed, his tone carrying both concern and growing respect for capabilities he was discovering in real time. Master Sergeant, Team Alpha doesn't have time for credential verification, Heaven replied. Her attention focused on checking the rifle's action and scope alignment with movements that demonstrated extensive experience with precision weapons. Collins made his decision based on the urgency of the tactical situation, rather than administrative protocols. Take what you need. Just bring everyone home. Heaven completed her equipment selection in 12 minutes, gathering not just the primary weapon system, but also backup ammunition, ballistic calculation tools, and environmental measurement devices that would allow her to account for wind, temperature, and atmospheric pressure during long-range shooting. The most critical equipment was the range-finding laser and ballistic computer that would provide precise target, distance measurements, and trajectory calculations. Heaven had trained with similar devices during her unauthorized calibration activities, but using them under combat conditions would test her preparation in ways that practice sessions couldn't replicate. Her route to the operational area took her through terrain that she had studied obsessively, but never traversed under tactical conditions. The concealed approach she had identified during months of map analysis proved even more challenging than anticipated, requiring navigation through rocky terrain that would provide cover from enemy observation while allowing rapid movement towards shooting positions. The first hour of movement tested her physical conditioning as she maintained pace through difficult terrain while carrying equipment that weighed nearly 60 pounds. Her grandfather's emphasis on functional fitness had prepared her for this challenge. But the psychological pressure of knowing that lives depended on her speed created additional stress that training hadn't fully anticipated. Radio silence was essential to avoid detection. But it also meant that Heaven had no communication with Base Command or Team Alpha during her approach movement. She had no way of knowing whether the tactical situation was deteriorating further or whether her mission timeline remained viable. The enemy sniper positions became visible when Heaven reached her planned observation point, approximately 900 meters from Team Alpha's location. Through her scope, she could identify muzzle flashes from 3 separate positions that confirmed her terrain analysis had been accurate. The enemy had established a coordinated ambush using natural concealment that conventional reconnaissance would have missed. More importantly, she could see Team Alpha's defensive position and assess the tactical situation that conventional counter-sniper teams would face when they eventually arrived. The enemy had chosen their positions to create overlapping fields of fire that would make any rescue attempt extremely dangerous even for specialized personnel. Heaven's shooting position provided clear lines of sight to all 3 enemy locations, but the ranges varied from 650 to 820 meters depending on the specific target. Variable distance shooting would require rapid scope adjustments and ballistic calculations that would test her training under the stress of combat conditions. The wind conditions were more challenging than her preparation had anticipated. Crosswinds at approximately 12 miles per hour with gusting variations that would affect bullet trajectory differently at each range. Heaven spent 15 minutes conducting environmental measurements and calculating precise holdover adjustments for each potential target. Her first shot would be critical not just for its tactical effect, but for the psychological impact on both friendly and enemy forces. Success would announce the presence of a counter-sniper capability that the enemy hadn't anticipated. Failure would alert them to her position while accomplishing nothing to help Team Alpha. Heaven selected her primary target based on tactical priority rather than shooting difficulty. The enemy sniper, who posed the greatest immediate threat to Team Alpha, was positioned at 780 meters in a location that provided him with clear shots at anyone attempting to move wounded personnel to cover. Through her scope, she could see the enemy sniper's position clearly enough to identify his shooting stance and weapon system. He was using a rifle that appeared to be an older military design, probably acquired through black market channels, and his position suggested training that was competent but not exceptional. The shot calculation required accounting for bullet drop of approximately 84 inches at that range, wind deflection of roughly 18 inches based on current conditions, and atmospheric pressure adjustments that would affect velocity by approximately 30 feet per second. Heaven made these calculations automatically, her grandfather's training having developed mental arithmetic skills that functioned under stress. She controlled her breathing and heart rate using techniques that had become automatic through years of practice. The rifle settled into perfect alignment with the target as Heaven applied pressure to the trigger with the smooth straight-back motion that her grandfather had drilled into muscle memory. The shot broke with perfect surprise, the rifle recoiling against her shoulder as the bullet began its trajectory toward a target who had no idea that his position had been compromised by someone he would never see 780 meters away. The enemy sniper collapsed without ever knowing what had hit him. Heaven was already transitioning to her second target before the sound of her shot reached Team Alpha's position. Part 10. Success against odds. The second shot required immediate scope adjustment as Heaven transitioned to an enemy position 650 meters distant, located on a different elevation that demanded rapid ballistic recalculation. Her training with her grandfather had emphasized speed of engagement when dealing with multiple targets, and those lessons proved critical as she worked to eliminate threats before the remaining enemies could identify her position. Through her scope, Heaven could see the second enemy sniper reacting to his partner's sudden collapse, scanning for threat sources while maintaining his position behind cover that protected him from Team Alpha but left him exposed to her elevated shooting position. His confusion was evident in his body language as he tried to understand how his carefully planned ambush had been compromised. Heaven's mental calculations adjusted for the reduced range while accounting for a slight increase in crosswind that required additional holdover compensation. The target was partially concealed behind rocky cover, presenting a shooting opportunity that required precision placement to ensure immediate incapacitation rather than merely wounding. Her second shot struck with devastating accuracy, the enemy sniper dropping from his position as the sound of rifle fire echoed across the valley. 2 shots, 2 eliminations, executed within 47 seconds of each other from ranges that would challenge most professional snipers under ideal conditions. The third enemy position presented the most difficult challenge both tactically and technically. Located 820 meters distant on a steep ridge face, the remaining sniper had better cover and had been alerted by the elimination of his partners. He was no longer focused on Team Alpha, but was actively searching for the counter-sniper threat that had just destroyed his tactical advantage. Heaven could see him moving between concealed positions, trying to identify her location while maintaining cover from her potential shooting angles. His movements suggested training and experience that exceeded his eliminated partners, making him a more dangerous opponent who wouldn't provide easy shooting opportunities. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Heaven Hernandez stood before a new generation of soldiers at the Special Operations Training Center, her instructor insignia reflecting a journey that had transformed her from overlooked logistics specialist to recognized expert in precision operations. The sniper qualification badges on her uniform represented skills that had been validated under the most demanding conditions possible. The training facility buzzed with activity as candidates from various military specialties participated in advanced marksmanship programs that had been expanded based on lessons learned from Heaven's unconventional emergence as a combat asset. Her story had become part of institutional education about identifying capabilities in unexpected places. The most important lesson from precision shooting, Heaven told her students during a ballistics calculation class, is that preparation and knowledge matter more than assumptions about who can succeed. Your background determines your starting point, not your ending point. Her students represented diverse military specialties, including several logistics and support personnel who had requested transfer to combat roles after Heaven's story demonstrated that such transitions were possible. The institutional barriers that had once seemed absolute had become permeable when capabilities could be proven rather than assumed. Captain Rodriguez, who had once dismissed her terrain analysis suggestions, now served as liaison between special operations and conventional units, helping to identify personnel whose skills might exceed their current assignments. The ripple effects of Heaven's mission had created systematic changes in how the military assessed and utilized human resources. Sergeant Hernandez, Rodriguez approached during a training break. We've had 17 support personnel request evaluation for combat roles since your mission became known throughout the command structure. Your success opened doors that many people didn't know existed. The transformation extended beyond individual career opportunities to address fundamental questions about institutional assumptions and resource utilization. Heaven's unauthorized mission had exposed systematic problems with talent identification that required policy changes at multiple command levels. During her off-duty hours, Heaven maintained correspondence with Team Alpha members whose lives her intervention had saved. Captain Reynolds had written extensively about how her mission had changed his perspective on capability assessment and the importance of recognizing potential in unexpected places. Your grandfather would be proud, Reynolds had written in his most recent letter, not just of your shooting skills, but of your determination to serve despite institutional barriers that tried to limit your contributions. Heaven's grandfather had indeed lived to see her recognition, expressing satisfaction that his training had prepared her not just for competitive shooting, but for service that protected others. His lessons about persistence and preparation had proven their value in ways that neither of them had fully anticipated. The Special Operations Command had conducted comprehensive analysis of Heaven's mission, incorporating her tactical innovations into advanced training curricula while developing new protocols for identifying unconventional capabilities within existing personnel. Her success had become a case study in human resource management and tactical innovation. Major Davidson, now promoted to lieutenant colonel, served as project officer for institutional changes inspired by Heaven's experience. The Hernandez Protocol, as it had become known, established procedures for evaluating personnel whose capabilities might exceed their current classifications. We discovered that systematic assumptions about role boundaries were preventing us from utilizing available capabilities effectively. Davidson explained during a command briefing that Heaven attended as a subject matter expert. Individual success stories like Sergeant Hernandez's suggest that our assessment methods needed fundamental revision. The protocol changes had identified dozens of personnel whose skills exceeded their assigned roles, leading to career transitions that improved both individual satisfaction and operational effectiveness. Heaven's unauthorized mission had catalyzed institutional learning that benefited the entire command structure. Her current assignment included developing training programs for unconventional warfare scenarios, where standard personnel classifications might not provide optimal resource allocation. The work combined her tactical experience with institutional knowledge, gained through navigating systematic barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. The most satisfying aspect of her transformation was mentoring personnel who faced similar challenges to those she had experienced. Young soldiers who felt limited by others' assumptions about their capabilities found in Heaven's story proof that determination and preparation could overcome institutional boundaries. The key is being ready when opportunity arrives. Heaven told her men during informal counseling sessions. You can't control when institutions will recognize your capabilities, but you can control whether you'll be prepared when recognition comes. Her story had become part of military folklore, demonstrating that exceptional capabilities could emerge from unexpected sources when individuals refused to accept limitations imposed by others' assumptions. The logistics specialist who had been deemed too small for operational duties had become proof that potential exists wherever institutions are willing to look for it. Heaven's transformation was complete, but her influence continued expanding as the institutional changes she had catalyzed created opportunities for others whose capabilities exceeded conventional expectations. Sometimes changing systems required proving that assumptions about human potential were fundamentally flawed. Her grandfather's training had prepared her for precision shooting, but military service had taught her that the most important targets were often the barriers that prevented people from contributing their best capabilities to missions that mattered. Standing before her students, Heaven saw the next generation of personnel who would continue expanding definitions of what was possible when preparation met opportunity. Her unauthorized mission had ended successfully, but her authorized mission of developing human potential was just beginning. The transformation from phantom sniper to recognized instructor represented personal vindication. But the institutional changes that followed represented progress that would benefit countless others who possessed capabilities that institutions hadn't learned to recognize yet. CTA, up next. You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.